Oh my goodness. Come on, babe. Oh, instantly. It's like a routine. You know what's awesome about having a bird? You can just throw them. I can play wedding release pigeon every day. Alrighty, everyone, hello, and welcome back to yet another episode of not only my nonsense, but definitely also Belok's nonsense. Belok being my minion of evil, right here. Haha, you can't get me. You can't get me. Oh no, you can't get me. Oh, you got me. And today we are talking a little bit about the Advent wreath specifically, and of course a little bit about what Advent is, because if you are on my Patreon, which all of you should be, by the way, then you are seeing this ahead of the curve, so maybe you could start preparing a little bit for it. If you're on my YouTube channel, then don't worry. You still have plenty of time to have fun with Advent because we are only in the first week. There are 4 weeks of Advent, and we will talk a little bit about each of them. Before we get into all that though, hello, my name is Sarah Streisand, and oh my god, slapper! And I am a Christian witch content creator, writer, educator, specifically a writer of this book right here, Discovering Christian Witchcraft, which, if you saw the phrase Christian witch and had yourself a big old confusion, don't worry, I understand. That's why this book exists. It explains exactly what the Bible is actually talking about when it says the word witchcraft in English. It explains the history of the word and how it changed from the time of the Bible to today, as well as all different kinds of folk traditions and everything else going on. And of course, it explains the very, very basics of witchcraft, magical philosophy, and how these tie into a Christian theological paradigm. And it's got a whole bunch of sources in the back that I've also listed for free on my blog if you want to check those out too. Keep in mind also that Discovering Christian Witchcraft's sequel is coming out this December 30th. And that one is all about the kind of meta behind the magic, the mystic journey that causes one to not only level up their magic, but really level up their mental, their mindset, and their connection to God in the first place. And as I said before, I do have a Patreon where you can get all of these videos 2 weeks early and ad-free. But if for now you just want to scope out the scene, see what's going on, by all means, just go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell, because we do post one here every single Friday. So, with the Advent wreath, I don't know if y'all have ever seen one of these. I saw one a lot growing up, because when I was going to the Catholic Church, every, end of November to Christmas, you would see this wreath of greenery with 4 candles on it, 3 purple ones and 1 pink one. This Advent wreath has been a tradition for quite a while already, according to a couple different sources, both this book and also this Catholic blog post. It seems the general consensus is that the Advent wreath is in itself, like as the wreath with the candles, that is not a pagan invention, but just like with the Christmas tree as well, that is not itself a pagan invention. What is considered a pagan holdover, though, is the very concept of evergreens being used as a symbol of life, even in a season where nothing else grows, right? The winter time is a time where anything with leaves or like soft petals will die and fall away, right? Think of, your tomato plants, your basil, all of these kind of soft leaf things. Those leaves are not built for winter, they die in the winter. But what does not die off in the winter are the needles of evergreen trees, things like pines and firs and all these other kinds of things. So the greenery itself was often used to decorate, to represent that concept of holding on to life even when everything else seems to be dying. And this was a common trope across these places, like, in Europe, especially Northern Europe, where winter was long and deep, and the only thing that reminded you that it wasn't just one big frozen wasteland was those evergreen trees. However, the Advent wreath and the Christmas tree themselves, both of these don't show up widespread across Europe for a long time, even in Christendom. There is a myth, a legend with the Christmas tree that was started when Martin Luther of the Protestant Reformation looked through the needles of a pine tree at the stars past it and just kind of got inspired to do the same thing. So he cut down a tree, brought it into his house, and put a bunch of lit candles on it, which is like not very fire safety 101. But that's kind of where, according to that legend, that practice started. Advent, on the other hand, likewise was a German tradition, and it's one that both the Protestant Lutherans and also the Catholic folk of Germany were starting to build their own traditions and ways around. And of course, even if the greenery might have been a holdover of that old pre-Christian culture in Germany, the fact is that the actual construction of the wreath itself has its own special and very specifically Christian meanings. For example, according to this blog post, the circular pattern of the wreath, oh my goodness, is a sign of God's eternal and just infinite love for us. It never ends. Just like the circle has no end point, neither does God's love, right? And then in all of that greenery, there's usually a space for those 4 candles, which on each week, a new one is lit, right? So on the first week, you'll light the first candle, the purple one. The second, you'll light 2 purples. The third, you'll light the purple, 2 purples and the pink. And then on the last week, all 4 will be lit. And so those follow a certain pattern, right? They follow certain themes that we reflect on over the course of Advent, all because we are basically hyping ourselves up towards the birth of Christ. And sometimes with the Advent calendar, there is a 5th candle that is set on Christmas Day that is, a white one in the middle to symbolize the birth of Christ. That's not always the case, but that can be a thing. In my 2026 Christian Witch Tarot journal, which I created entirely by myself, by the way, proudly saying that I made this with no AI, none of that, designed every of these pages myself, researched the stuff myself, did all of that myself to make this as a tool for folks to kind of get that more liturgical Christian rhythm in their year, to get access to all of the scriptures that are normally read on a liturgical lectionary calendar in church, and also to give a space, right, for astrological season planning, for that little bit of shadow work, for those kind of spell work and ritual how-tos, for learning about times like Ash Wednesday, Lent, Advent, all of that. And of course, for logging one's conversations with God with these 3-card tarot pulls every week. I also discuss the different holidays that show up as well as their neo-pagan counterparts. And as you might imagine, I do also discuss and explain what Advent means. So I do have like a kind of mock Advent wreath in here, as well as an explanation of what goes on in there. And also each week there is a different tarot spread for the weeks of Advent, a little how-to guide with lighting the candle, some things to reflect on, some explanation, all that kind of stuff. I do still have plenty of those, so if you wanted something like that to kind of guide you along your process, your relationship with God, your learning about God, your abiding by and learning about these kind of very well-storied traditions, go ahead and grab one of those. They are very, very cool. But those 4 candles, the 3 purple, the 1 pink, as each week goes on, they are of a different theme, right? So the first week is a theme of hope, the second of peace, the third, that pink candle of joy, and the fourth, the last candle of love. And as you go to church each week, you'll see that these candles are lit as well, that there are sermons that kind of follow this whole thing. We're getting into, right, the birth of the light of the world, which is kind of, again, very, very conveniently analogous with similar pre-Christian themes of this time of year, right? The light and the darkness for Christians. Jesus is that light and the darkness. And so naturally, as Europe is not the Middle East and the geographical and environmental situation looks radically different, you will notice that pre-Christian Europeans who then converted to Christianity simply continued to do some of their old traditions in a new way, who simply adapted some of their old thematic understandings of their own environment and their own world to Christianity, right? They don't live in a desert, so they wouldn't have anything to do with that kind of desert landscape. What they did have something to do with was the frozen tundra and all of the greenery of the evergreens that were still in it. So that's how this construction kind of made its way in here and contributed to a large part of what we understand of that Christmas feel today. But I should also make it clear, again, as I said, this is something that was specifically in Germany from like the 16th century to about the 19th century. It wasn't until the 19th century that the Advent wreath, and also by extension stuff like the Christmas tree, started getting picked up by other countries. So actually these things that we think are the absolute quintessential, like must-haves in our Christmas themes and aesthetic, they're very new in the history of the church. Even in the history of just Christianity, they are very new. Much newer than like when Europe became Christian overall. And it's notable that, especially in all of this, it was when Americans caught on to these things that it really started being widespread, specifically, especially with the Christmas tree, but also even with Advent wreaths, right? As it started going around, getting tossed around, getting seen by other people started picking it up and kind of making it their own thing and incorporating their own carols and canticles and folklore and other things into it, which is really interesting to see. But as I showed you in my journal, there is like that kind of process. So if this is maybe something you want to either jump in on at the end of the season or start yourself this season, there are absolutely ways to do that. And in fact, one way is sometimes certain churches will actually have workshops to create these things. That's actually where I got my frame for my Advent wreath, my little wire frame. You can find these like in stores, you can find them on Amazon, but for me, my church was running like a little workshop after service where you could go and hang out with other people and build your own wreath. So that was really fun. That was really interesting, and I liked that a lot. They brought greenery, they brought the candles and the wreaths and all that, and we were able to just kind of make it ourselves. So that's step one, is go get yourself something to weave some greenery into. You can also buy like pre-made ones, you can buy little fake ones, you can do whatever you want, but the greenery is kind of important, right? for what it is and what it's supposed to be. If you want it to be traditional, they have fake ones, they have non-evergreen ones too, but we're witches. We know that we need some evergreen in there, okay? We know also that there are properties of different types of evergreen that are really helpful, which we'll get into in a second. But after that, right, it's as simple as kind of following that prayer schedule. If you look up something like the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer or any kind of Roman Catholic prayer books, they'll tell you a little bit about the prayers that are usually said during the Advent candle lighting. This can be done in church, right, with the big one in church. This can be done at home, and it's usually a call and response thing. Usually you do it with your family, so one person kind of starts it, the other people respond. You say your prayers, you do your blessings, and you reflect on those themes: hope, peace, joy, and love. And then all of that contemplation all month long leads us right up into the birth of Christ, which is a big feast, a big celebration in the Christian calendar. It's also important to note, though, that there are a lot of nuances and a lot of additions to this Christmas season that can prop it up and kind of, add more to it as well. And one of those is very, very interesting, and I think very important, and that is the concept of Blue Advent. So it's notable that on the 1 week of a different color, that week of joy, the pink candle, some folks also engage in a practice known as Blue Advent, which is a time of recognizing that while, yes, joy, great, awesome, things are good and things are happy and we should focus on joy, there's also the fact that sadness and grief persist. During this time in, the Christmas era, there's a lot of stuff that goes on that people have reason to mourn for. Family members passing away or having maybe the first Christmas without a loved one. That's very hard for people. And to insist that we should only think about joy and not think about all these other things is to deny an entire facet of human life, which is not helpful for anyone really, I think, of any spirituality. You cannot toxic positivity your way out of the loss of a loved one or of any other serious issues, right? Whether it's, losing a job right around Christmas time or having to flee a terrible situation or losing a loved one or any of these other terrible things, the reality is that life is not perfect, not peachy, not great for everyone. And having a Blue Advent service, which encourages not just not being sad really, but encourages quiet contemplation. So none of the big jumping around, no music, no, high spirits and happy, but just holding space to mourn, to pray, to do penance, right? To do all these things and just sit quietly in God's shelter. That is very important as well. And that's kind of a flip side and underside of that week of joy that I think is very important to hold space for. Another very interesting thing, though, that I think there is are the O antiphons. And the O antiphons are these kind of beseechings to God that during church will come after the Magnificat canticle, which I'll play a little bit for you here. This Catholic page talked a little bit about it. And so basically it's a canticle that can be sung in certain different ways depending on how you stress it. When you listen to it, you'll see what I mean when I say it is very, very classically high liturgy, churchy, Catholic sounding.
My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Saviour. For he hath regarded the lowliness of his handmaiden.
See what I'm talking about? But that canticle, that Magnificat canticle, what that is actually, that is the thing that Mary says to Gabriel. When Gabriel says, hello, guess who's getting a baby free of charge? Mary says, oh, word, and then gives that whole Magnificat, right? She gives that whole speech in Luke about all this stuff, and that is also where the Hail Mary prayer comes from. People fucking saying the Hail Mary prayer is not biblical, bitch. Where do you think it fucking came from? Anyway. But these O antiphons are also really interesting, right? So like every single day that goes on, they're really short little kind of praises that follow a similar literary theme, right? They kind of all end with a come command, where they're asking the Messiah and all the promises of the Messiah of Jesus to come to us, that we might, receive them and live in them, right? They also show a lot of very interesting epithets of Jesus and of God, which is very fascinating to me. Like, O Adonai, O Key of David, O Rising Star, or Morning Star, which, morning star is kind of a word that means a certain thing we now think is a name of a certain, but whatever. But O Desire, O Emmanuel, right? All these things, these are epithets of the Messiah, of Jesus, and also of God, Adonai, and they remind us these different ways we can perceive of God. And they're said, I believe, on the week leading up to Christmas. So like that kind of 17th to 23rd, that week, each one of these, for each of the 7 days of that week, these are said, whatever week it is that's before Christmas, or whatever 7 days are before Christmas. And it's really just kind of like a big crescendo, a big build up to that Christmas Day celebration. And Mass service is very exciting, it's very fun. And it really just kind of helps build that energy. Us as witches, we understand why we need to build energy, right? When we're doing great big celebrations, great big spells, great big rituals, we know that part of our ritual involves building energy, and that's no different here in a Catholic Mass. The entire month of December ends up being a month-long building of energy up to the day of Christ's birth, which is a massive time for almost, I would say, analogous to a full moon ritual, really just calling down, accepting, receiving, and embodying all of those promises of the Messiah that we ask for in those O antiphons. So that's another thing you could add to your Advent practice if you want to. But now, as I said, when it comes to creating a little Advent wreath, definitely, if you are a witchy inclination, consider what type of evergreen you are weaving into your wreath. So depending on which one you use could change a lot. And also this page has to say about juniper. Juniper is that kind, right, that has those bright blue or kind of almost robin's egg blue berries on them. Those are really good for things like anti-theft, exorcism, protection, right? And other kinds of pine or other kinds of evergreen are also really good for, right, love, for protection, for all these kinds of other things. Moreover, stuff like rosemary, while it's not a tree, is still technically evergreen. Rosemary is a massive evergreen that comes into our kitchens, especially this time, because it's still out there, because it's still so fragrant, because it also is that evergreen that reminds us a lot of pine trees. I got a couple of bushes of rosemary in my front yard. I definitely think I'm going to include some of that in my Advent wreath, because rosemary itself is a great herb for protection, for cleansing away all that is bad, for bringing in all that is good, and so on. But whatever you want to focus on, think of an Advent wreath also as something of, like, because it's a circle, you can kind of think of it as something of a portal, right? You could think of it as something as basically like a big magnet, or a kind of a big holding space that attracts all that energy you're looking for, right? So we have all these promises of the Messiah. What evergreen and what of their meanings aligns with those promises that have to do with the Messiah? And how can we create this Advent wreath where every week yet another candle turns on, literally like some magic shit? What can we make this a vortex of? What energy are we asking God to really bring to us? How can we invite our friends in creation, the evergreen, to contribute their prayers up into God with us, so that God can bless us with a miracle in return? This is an awesome tool to make like a linchpin of your focus, basically, to make something that gives you a visual reminder and a visual understanding of where and how this energy is going to concentrate, so that God can transmute it into the blessings that this season brings. It is a purely purely Christian tradition that has so much witchy potential, it is actually unreal, and I'm very excited to kickstart mine again, even though I do plan to really enjoy the maximum mostages of my autumn altar and my autumn setup. I don't plan on decorating for Christmas until at least a couple weeks into December, but even then, I still must absolutely put together my Advent wreath in time for Advent, which is on November 30th, is the very first Sunday of Advent. So, with all that said, I hope this is a little helpful overview of the Advent wreath if you've never heard of it. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Let me know if you've got any kind of ideas whirling around in here that you are thinking of now that you understand a bit more about what this is and how to participate in it. And with all that, I will see you next time for some more good chats. So, see ya!